And a lot of the distributional concerns are met through the income tax. The VAT will reduce prices on the poor. The VAT will not make it very progressive. Mildly progressive, not very progressive. Progressivity comes with the better income tax performance. That was part of it. The other part of the story, which has completely been forgotten, was that you're taking the FPR off your backs. That was in the law. FPR was not authorized under the draft law that had been drafted to issue any more SROs. There would be an arm's length risk-based audit, not a audit which is determined on whether or not he likes your face or your nose or your hair or who you're related to. That's what, unfortunately, the audit had become, and that's why Shaukat Aziz basically gave up. And they just abandoned the audit in 2004 altogether, which completely destroyed the tax administration. So in order to correct the problem, they created a bigger problem. That problem still is with us today. Taking the sectors out of the VAT, completely stopping the audit. Huge mistakes were made at that time. So you mangled the tax administration in spite of the $135 million that the World Bank gave to fix it. And since 2008, we've had mission after mission after mission to try and fix it with working with our colleagues from the FBR. Hasn't happened. Nothing has happened. And my guess is that the resistance, internal resistance, comes from the removal of the SRO law powers. And it was sabotage. It was sabotage internally. Because the draft that was prepared was not the draft that was submitted to Parliament, which was very draconian. That's not what was prepared. And then they said, well, you know, there's a problem with services. We can't do this. We can't do this VAT. Services belong to the provinces. Unfortunately, I was there, and I sat down with Kaisa Bengali. We came up with a solution for services. Not a very good one, but a workable solution. Phir bhi nahi kiya. So, question is, you know, do we really want to do it? And I'm now beginning to doubt whether that was ever the intention. Now, I'd like to come back to this basic point, that the removal of these distortions, removal of these exemptions. Remember, exemption means input taxation. Zero rating means you take it out of the tax net altogether. Exemption means you're still taxing, but taxing in a cascading manner, because you don't give refunds. If you remove these distortions, you remove cascading, you do not hurt the poor. You do not hurt exporters. So baat kiski kar rahe the? And if you can't be China with 9% of GDP, please at least be Sri Lanka. 7% of GDP kar lein. Sri Lanka is not a genius, it doesn't come out of the sky. Hamare jaise log hain, with our foibles. Problem is that, and this was Kamrul Islam's point, that the CPR at the time, and I think FBR subsequently, with all due respects to our colleagues sitting here, has developed cozy relationships with important sectors. There is an SRO culture which bypasses Parliament altogether. To give a SRO on imports to firms, duty free mil rahi, individual firms, which means then you're discriminating against the others. You favor one, you discriminate against the others. The whole point of the reform is to create a level playing field, so there's no discrimination against anybody. So you need to have arm's length administration, but that's being resisted. What they have done now is to give greater discretion to the tax administration, especially for audit. Wapat de diya unko, field officers. So why also do you want to give subsidies to these firms? Some of these are geriatric infants who can't compete. Let them die if they can't compete in the international market. Why are they giving input subsidies to efficient agriculture at the time when world prices, food prices are the highest ever? Have you done any input subsidies? तो कहते हैं एग्रीकल्चर को टैक्स करें, किस तरह टैक्स करें? Subsidies there, input subsidies there. Personal right to rich farm. There's no intention of taxing agriculture. I want to talk through this. It's a little technical. Just a simple point that when you do domestic zero rating, it means that take carpets and luxury textiles, उसको zero rate कर दिया. अब कौन खरीदता है textiles, luxury textiles and carpets इस मुल्क में? तो नहीं खरीदता. कौन खरीदता है? तो अगर people's government कहती है नहीं हम इसको zero rate करेंगे, that means that the consumers of these goods are being favored over consumers of food items or energy. And that, to me, is an aberration. Why? And the work that we had done I'd done in the 80s for India, Pakistan, Mexico, China, with Professor Lord Stern, we had this, and if you look at number 11, how clothing or other non-foods, it's either in the middle or the higher ranges of these ranks of what are ranks for welfare losses. So it means that these are not good items on which to give reduced taxes. For any inequality aversion, whether you are concerned with the poor or just concerned with the efficiency, you would not give them input subsidies, but you are. But why? Now, I'll come back to the why. Let me just talk a little bit about Plan B on tax reform. Plan B on tax reform was if you don't do a VAT, you'll remove these zero rating exemptions. Repress the income tax holds, create an arm's length administration. This was agreed with the IMF. Okay, ठीक नहीं करते, goods पे तो करें, ठीक करें. Now, the revenue implications are not the same as a proper VAT, and you might even lose revenues in the short run because it's marginal changes. But the idea is that it creates a level playing field and fixes the FBR. ये किया था, but then within a week they flip-flopped and removed it. And you have this wonderful SRO 283 issued on April the 1st, which I call FBR's April Fool gift to the nation. Read it. It really is classic. Completely confused. The person who's written it does not understand the VAT. It really is shocking because these are the guys who are implementing the VAT. And they mixed up inputs, final goods, intermediate goods. With that, it really makes arm's length administration impossible. It favors some sectors, it discriminates against others. It reintroduces cascading. And if you look at item 185 in this SRO, it says anything that we have forgotten in this list and comes to our mind in the future is also covered. So it's an SRO to end all SROs, forever. So with that SRO and what they've done on the tax audit, etc., they've killed that tax administration reform. The top is dead. Overrides supremacy of parliament. So who gains from this? Consumers and producers of luxury textiles and carpets? Is it a subsidy to these firms that can't make do in the world markets? Is this getting around WTO rules? Certainly not the poor. They don't consume these goods. So what does domestic zero rating have to do with exports anyway, which are already zero rated? Baba, kyun kar rahe ho? This is a way of subsidizing these buggers. Now what is the consequence of this reform or lack of reform? Well, some of the two key successes of this government are in jeopardy. NFC award Shaukat Tareen had given on the basis that this VAT would be implemented, that we would be raising 1% additional per year. Provinces expected that. It's not going to happen. 18th Amendment, and I'll talk about this at length. is in risk because the devolution of spending is unfunded, because you have additional spending when you devolve. And unfortunately, even the existing level of spending is underfunded. So you're now pushing the problem into the provinces. And this completely hamstrings the growth strategy because you don't have an investment envelope, you don't have a resource envelope. Is pe aap kharchenge? Is there a role for the state? Log kehte hain, theek hai, kharcha kam kare? Fine, of course you need to do that. But devolving spending to provinces that don't have the funding, you're doing that, but you're doing it in a very haphazard manner. Who handles household security? Who handles public health? Who handles education? Climate change, natural disasters. These are all issues which are important to every Pakistani. What do you do with the poorest people who don't have any support? Will the provinces provide, or is it the role for the state in general? What is the appropriate level of public spending? Well, it depends on what you think the state should do. You know, and many people in Chile, they said we'll have a very reduced role for the state. And, you know, to some extent, that's a good thing. But China had a more proactive role for the state, even for things like social protection, education, healthcare. We should learn from China. But even if you were following Chile, Chile's spending level is at 27% of GDP. They raised 25% of GDP in revenues. Ab baat kiski kar rahe hain? If you're following Chicago, Chile's level of spending and revenue raising is 25% of GDP, not 10. So what needs to be done? You need to define the role of the state. What sort of functions should the state perform? Do we have enough roads, transport, facilities? Is there efficient public provision? Will the private sector provide it? With or without state guarantees? If it's going to be public-private partnerships, what is the state liability going to be and are you going to provision for it? How are you going to provide effective social protection, household protection, defense, public security? All of these things have to be costed and put together as part of your necessary spending requirements leading to a revenue requirement. You need to, of course, rely on an efficient private sector. But, you know, are you going to continue relying on inefficient geriatric infant industries? So really what needs to do is to think through what is the role of the state. Some good work has been initiated in the Planning Commission. I think it's a first step. More needs to be done in defining what the role of the state needs to be and the necessary revenue envelope. So really, if you take the current level of revenues and you take out the debt service, security, and public administration, there's no role for the state in anything. And you're putting down these functions with no revenue. So devolution in that case becomes slash and burn. But it's not realistic. So let's get real. You know, we can't just rely on cutting spending. Look at Argentina. Look at Bolivia, poor country of Latin America, 38% revenues. Primary surplus of 6.3%, 2008. Chile, general revenues of 27%. Spending of 22%, primary surplus of 4.8. These are countries that are doing well. And these are the countries on the basis of which the IMF said we do not need detailed conditionality. Unfortunately, we are not even close to Bolivia, which is the poorest and most backward of the Latin American countries. So really what you need is a national consensus. I still think that the 15%, which was in the 2008 Gilani plan or stabilization plan, which Waqar Masood had prepared, is too unambitious for a country of this potential, this size, and this importance. So really we need to have a reconsideration of revenue assignments, consolidation of bases, and distributional concerns done by income taxes and spending.